Did you travel to Connaught Place by metro station? Metro, or did you take a car? I mean, of course, at this stage you would have taken a car, but do some of you intend to travel by metro? Please do, huh? Please do. Huh? Yeah, please do. But take the metro from Haidarpur, which is the closest metro station where students from the university get dropped.
Here.
Yeah. That's a good 45-50 minutes from here. I mean, you'll take the car from here till there. But there's also a university shuttle that goes. And from there you can take the metro and probably go to... So the Connaught Place, the space where you went to, is called Rajiv Chowk. That's in the metro station as a centermost point. And interesting. It's costs you around 20-25 rupees for that long a ride. Which is, I don't know. I mean, it's they have increased the fare, and there's a lot of protest on that. And I felt that it's heavily underpriced in terms of the cost margins. But just that the frequency of travel and the number of people using the metro is so high that it's made Delhi Metro as one of the most profitable ventures. In fact, the metro system has now emerged as they were ranked in the top 3 in the world. At some point of time, it was the best performing metro simply because of the number of people it's carrying. As simple as that. And in peak hours, you will find a lot of staff there as well, trying to close the doors, because people have a notion that maybe the next train will not come in. So you need help. But it's interesting because that's the common mode of transport for I would say 60 to 70% of the lower middle income class group. Not for every commoner, because every commoner is traveling by the state transport bus, which I wouldn't suggest. But travel at least by the metro. Okay, we'll get started. So I guess in the morning we started with more of an abstract discussion on how discussion in economics should somewhere focus a bit on storytelling, right? Using narratives as examples or illustrations. And we started somehow by picking up India as a case or as a narrative to discuss. I think we began our discussion by talking about looking at some of the key macro challenges affecting the economy, and one of which was looking at how the transition of growth, right? And where growth means the development of production capacities across the country and across states, has not been matched or seen in a very conventional manner, right? You usually see the primary to secondary to tertiary growth-led expansion in most countries. Britain had that during the time of the Industrial Revolution, and most of the countries as well. I mean, Australia saw that. In fact, it's known, the field of study that tends to look at this transition pattern is the field of economic history. So you have to look at any Australian economic historian. There are a lot of at ANU who've worked on trying to understand when this era of industrialization started, which was when can you track historically industrialization in different parts? When I say, 1800s, yeah, okay. So how that started affecting issues related to distribution of wealth and most of those. So that in India's context is actually reverse ordered. You see a lot of growth in the tertiary sector, that's the service sector, particularly after the 90s. One of the reasons is, as lawyers, I think some of you would know the TRIPS agreement. In the 90s, there is a trade-related intellectual property rights, TRIPS and TIPS. These are the two main agreements based on which the WTO, the World Trade Organization, was working. And the TRIPS agreement, India became a signatory of the TRIPS agreement around 92-93, as a result of which a lot of multinational companies started using India as a big market for investment. In fact, software, as you know now, was never India's comparative advantage, so as to speak of, right? because the internet revolution is not something which was spilling over that much this side of the world. But what was hardware. So we in fact had an export of computer hardware or computer parts, right? In fact, if I could recall, in the 90s when we had to buy a computer, we would never buy a single brand computer, right? It would be extremely costly. So what would we buy is an assembled computer, right? And the assembling of the computer happened right here in India, and that would bring down the cost by around almost a tenth. So if a normal computer like an HP or an IBM a desktop would cost around like $1,000 US dollars, in India the assembled computer would cost you less than 100, right? And that was a big industry that we had early 90s. But as a result of shift in pattern of investment to software, you saw a lot of emphasis on software development. So cities like Bangalore, Hyderabad, right, which you must have heard in passing, right, in references, started growing around that time, and they became the software hubs for Microsoft and a lot of other companies. So the tertiary sector started seeing a boom. Manufacturing sector, on the other hand, stagnated. It did grow, but largely on the sides of activities of infrastructural or real estate sector. And that's something which I pointed out. The second was issues of macro employment challenges. I didn't get a lot of time to cover this extensively, but I did draw in a few numbers to give you an idea on the distribution of labor employed in the country across different sectors. While you see that most of the people in terms of a percentage level are involved in the agricultural sector, manufacturing sector, construction sector have seen the largest rise in terms of the labor force participation rate. In other words, more and more people have started working in the construction sector, and services has largely been restricted to those who've had the means of education across secondary and tertiary levels. If you've had a college education or you've studied at a much higher level, you have more of a chance to. The person who's managing the AV team has a degree in civil engineering. I was just having a conversation before you guys started, was working with the Indian Railways. I don't know if you know, Indian Railways is perhaps one of the largest hirer of people after the Indian Army. It's also a monopoly. Private sector has no role to play. The Delhi Metro Rail Corporation was one of the anomalies, right? Where for the first time a private sector entity in conjunction or working conjunction with the state government was given that autonomy. So Indian Railways becomes a very important story as well in the entire story of employment. So I think the point at which I stopped was where we were discussing that the growth or the rate of growth in the private sector jobs across different sectors has been stagnating. In other words, has been lowering, in fact, in the last 5 to 10 years. This can be largely explained by how domestic private investment in India has been going down. We've argued it extensively in different research platforms, but one of the problems has been that the private sector has not found much impetus in investing at home. They've been interested in making heavy investments abroad. One prime example in the Australian context you would see is this big group called Adani, which was investing heavily in mining. There was a huge issue in the Australian Parliament, in fact, that there was a big FDI investment that he had got. Adani's own investments at home, you have to track, if you look at his investments at home, it's very limited. So in fact, most of their investments are abroad, different countries. Same goes for the iron and steel segment, coal mining. Most of these segments have seen a stagnation of private investment. So the issue to tackle domestic private investment was by what? What would the government do? If you're not able to increase private investment for whatever reasons, procedural compliances, ease of doing business being hard, too much of complications in contract laws, people don't understand the document, paying taxes is difficult. We can't change all of this overnight, but we do want investment levels to go up because that's important for pushing demand. Once you get the demand level high, you produce more. As you produce more and sell in the market, your GDP goes up. So what do you expect? I'm just asking, if you're thinking as a government person here, you have election coming in the next 3-4 years. Yeah, so one would be that the public companies start investing more to fill in the gap And that's how you see that as public investment went up, the demand for public sector jobs went up as well. But government is never a very good investor. History suggests this. It often leads up to debt, because once you've made an investment, it's very difficult to repudiate it. Private sector company can come in, incur losses and boom out, right? But with public sectors, you've seen that that's very rare. So what are the other alternatives? One is, let's say, public sector investment. The other would be what? To depend on? Let me use hand signs. Something coming from foreign direct investment or foreign institutional investment. We call these as two kinds of foreign investment. One is basically hot money coming in the share market, or in other words, the portfolio stocks, where a foreign company, Buffett, can sit right in the US with a click of a button, buy X number of shares. And that would be a part of, and he can dump those shares as well whenever he wants. That's more of the volatile investment, right? And the other is more of an investment routed through the government, which we call as foreign direct investment. The government, at least over the last decade and a half, has been extensively relying on foreign direct investment in India. And even that started slumping in the last 3-4 years, as a result of which you see today in the news itself, in retail sector, FDI has been allowed up to the percentage of 100. So 100% investment can come from any foreign company to India. So the earlier norm was you could invest up to 60 or 70% and have a partnership with an Indian company, right? Which a lot of stores, single brand rich stores, did not want. Walmart will not enter into the Indian retail market entering into an alliance with any other company. That's not how Walmart does business. Or one of the other, think of a furniture store. Is IKEA there in Australia? Yeah. So now IKEA's investment was stuck as a result. So this allows now for retail sector investment coming from abroad. Again, it's strategy to increase foreign direct investment. And as students, you would be surprised to also observe, I think, is that there is still no evidence that an increase in FDI translates into increase in employment opportunities domestically. There is still no empirical evidence across the board which can stay with that confidence that if you get more FDI, it increases your job. There is an expectation it does. There's a normative assumption behind it, but there is no clear idea. So that's something which I felt that is important for us to understand the first two challenges. Let me turn out on the gender point, and this is, I guess, one of the most important points to look at what's happening with the Indian economy as a whole over the last couple of decades. The three ratios here, I think the two are important. There's something what's written as LFPR, that's called as labor force participation rate. So the number of people who are above the age of 15 till the age of 45, how many of them are actually part of the, in other words, are coming as they're getting college education, how many of them are entering the labor force for jobs, right? Now, these can be contractual jobs or permanent jobs, but how many of them are coming in? The second is the workforce population ratio. So as a percentage of both the total population, how much of, let's say, so the total male population, how many men are working in the workforce, right? This gives us an idea of how many are actually not working or a part of the workforce group, and what could be the reason explaining that. Now, one of the things that you'd observe in India, which is not focused a lot as against the conventional metric, is that we don't focus too much on unemployment that much. Well, unemployment is an important concern across the world, but in India, the problem in employment is not unemployment. That means you don't have a job. You do have a job, but you're not earning enough to manage your subsistence levels, right? In other words, the issue seems to be largely of minimum wage law implementation, because states don't have that much of resources to give or implement minimum wage laws. And there's some research our center conducted on minimum wage law implementation systems across states. And the other issue that is primarily looking at employment is that while most people do have a job, most of them are underemployed. So, as you would see, there is, let's say, when you go down and grab your meal at Sodexo, you can see that probably the same task of handling the plate can be done by one person, or we don't even actually need a person for that. You can just go and collect your own plate. But there's a person for that, right? So if you're having too many people employed, you're paying in for them, and there's a distribution of income levels. But as a result, and in the same case, if you look at a farm, two people can do the task of the entire farming process, but in fact, not 10 are employed on the farm itself. So more and more people are working at a system where they seem to be underemployed to the capacity that they have. This is very different from most countries. The only country where you can think of a parallel example was the case of China pre-reform, pre-1978. There is a similar structure of underemployment. So if you look at the gendered segregation, what is that you see? And I've put three categorizations: rural, urban, and total. So rural means largely the village areas, urban is largely cities. If I ask you to make three quick observations, right, from what's happening with female labor force participation rate in the rural area. Are more women working than men? Is it similarly closer? No. That's the blue column that you're looking at. So it's less than 30% of female labor force participation rate in rural areas, while in case of male it's more than 70, right? What about workforce participation? More or less similar. But if you see the urban area, you see in fact the female labor force participation, right? That is the number of females working or entering the job market is lesser than the number of females entering the job market in rural areas. I don't know if you could make that distinction, right? What does that reflect? More and more women are dropping out from, let's say, formal sector jobs or official jobs or organized sector jobs, or are less and less women are able to or capable to get jobs. Well, capability is a different part, but ability is largely determined on literacy rates. So if you look at literacy rates, that's surprising, right? Because it can't be possible that in rural areas, female literacy is higher than urban areas, right? So this seems to be quite an interesting. So we've been trying to do research in looking at that part, but I just wanted to throw some questions on so one common point across rural and urban areas is there is less female to male labor force participation, right? In both labor force participation rate and the workforce population ratio. That means less and less women have a job which is counted as a job in nature of work. Now that's a separate debate, that what do you count as work and what do you not count as work, right? And that's been a huge debate in a lot of feminist economics discourse as well. I'm trying to factor even self-employed task here. So even if a woman is working as a household laborer, something which we look at the domestic help market, which is in the unorganized sector, even that would be captured here. So I'm not only looking at monetized work, I'm talking about even work in this till the time you have a job where you're getting some money, right? So this is in labor statistics, there's self-employment, there's regular work, there's casual work, and the number of metrics. We're not getting into that. If there was a research on that, we would have looked at it. Yeah, you were asking a question.
Just my question was if you include like mother duties and stuff like that.
Yeah, till the time it is a service that is being lent. But the issue has been, how do you monetize the work that women are doing at home? In fact, there's a lot of scholarship now and coming, particularly from the Indian feminist court, is that one shouldn't quantify it, because then you'd actually lose sight and perspective on to what extent one is working. If I'm doing the daily chores where I'm washing my dishes, how is that I monetize it? It's a common problem, right? So apart from the lack of metrics to assess it, I think the issue has been that why there has been a significant dropout in women employment from regular and casual labor structures as well. I think that's a more structural question. In other countries, and most other countries, and particularly in the developed societies, The issues there seem to be largely on assessing the value of work. So if you look at ILO, International Labour Organization, most of their discussions right now seem to be looking at this issue which you've raised. I think in India it's more fundamental. It's like you don't have the basic structure in place at the first level itself. Now, what is happening is that if you look at over the last 3 decades, the female to male labor force participation rate at a time when employment opportunities in India started booming dropped down from the year around 2003, 2004. One does not know what could be the reason. One feels that what happens is, looking at the data closely, a lot of women after the age of 30 seem to have dropped out from their jobs. And this seems to be the age by which they're getting married. Sorry. Yeah, I'll just complete the point. Yeah. So by the time they're getting married, a lot of women, as a result of coming into a system of social arrangement, are losing the job that they were working and are switching over to self-employment opportunities. So there is evidence where self-employment opportunities has gone up in areas of working from home, right? But that's happening for a lot of women after the age of 30. And this is the educated group that one is talking about, which is anyway very less. Yeah, Ajay, you were saying something.
I was just wondering, does this figure contain you understand, the maid? Because there is large number of women in India. They do work in normal, like rich people's house or like middle class, like everybody from middle class or rich class have one lady as a maid at least.
Yeah.
And like one cleaner and one who do, because I understand the Indian community nowadays, the mostly women, they don't work at all. If I visit my home, no woman works. We get cleaner, it comes in the morning, one lady comes in the afternoon for cooking, and then one, if you have extra money, they will come to look after your kids.
Yeah. So no, that's something which we call or is a part of the informal labor market segment. It's not accountable for, and that's why most discussion on employment scenarios in India is very complicated, because you're only talking about 20% of the people most of the time. I'm talking about these trends being for 20%. 80% is not even captured, right? Let's put it this way. Why? Because how is that you're going to be able to capture it? If you are paying for a maid for the service she's offering at your residence in cash, like I'm just saying, yeah. If a maid is working at my house and I'm paying her in cash, right, or I'm paying him in cash, that's not captured in any formal accounting measure, right? Unless and until it's a service. So you do have, there is an e-commerce portal that you can think for. I mean, if you just Google Indian domestic labor market e-commerce portal, there is bookmybuy.com or something like that. They have tried to formalize by issues, because they are the most vulnerable segments as well. Issues, I mean, their issue of monetization not even comes. The issue comes of dignity, fundamental rights, right? So there's a lot of, I mean, I can point at a lot of literature, but I'm saying that this trend that I'm trying to even bring out is for the formal and those who are officially employed as a part of an organized segment, like a company. Like if a woman is employed here in Jindal, right, it would be a part of a formal segment. While the women that you will see here working on the grasses and the horticulture segment, they're not a part of the formal segment. They're all subcontracted. They're working on a daily wage. Within here itself, you can understand what is a part of a formal setup and what is a part of an informal. There's a part of an unorganized, which is the person who's working as an AV operator here. He would be a part of a third party vendor, who is again working in a subcontracted thing. So there's a lot of complications and terminologies, but I'm looking just saying, let's say organized formal, because it's a short discussion time that we have. Even there you see there is a significant drop in the female to male participation rate. But if you look at across sectors, there are two sectors where the gender balance seems to be most profound. These are two areas of health and education. So in fact, in areas of healthcare and in case of education, across per primary, secondary and tertiary kinds of educational facilities, both male and female employment is pretty significant, right? Which are the sectors where you see that the maximum gender divide happens? Here, if you just look at the chart, you see transport, right? Trade. Now I'll give you an example, like, because you're not students of Jindal, and I can share some confidential information that way. In a recent exam in development economics, I put this chart up, okay? And all I had asked was, what, in your opinion, would explain the first of all, if you can explain the trends happening in the female to male labor force participation rate, and what could be the reasons explaining the divide. I was quite surprised. I mean, I would say I was shocked that almost 99% of the students responded that activities like trade, construction, transport are physically intensive, which women are not able to do. This is coming from a student base here, who are quite, I would say, I'm very confident looking at teaching at universities across India. This is one of the most gender sensitive spaces that you'd find as an educational institution. A lot of, so, and we had 3 core discussions, and to my surprise, it's a 70% women based classroom. And female students thinking that women are less physically capable. So the point being, not even 1% of the base, the student base, questioned anything about the data. And that to me was surprising. That nobody, I mean, the fact that it's out there, it's imposing that either something is wrong with the data, or either something is wrong with those who are already employed. I think 2 or 3 answers tried to question a couple of things, but nobody questioned data. So now what's interesting to see is that over the last 3 decades, jobs created have also been created in these sectors: transport, trade, construction, manufacturing. We discussed this, that this are the sectors where most of the income has been generated. So in other words, women somewhere have been left out from the process of the job creation market, and from where income is coming. At the same time, you see health and education are the 2 sectors where you do see that there is an active female to male labor force participation process. But these 2, as you would note in a while from now, are the most underfunded and less publicly funded sectors in India. And that's why you see the higher level of inequalities. Let's not blame India for that. All right? Let's look at the South Asian story. Now, which countries do you feel are doing better than India in terms of the female to male labor force employment? Because one may say that before India got its independence in 47, most of South Asia was India. Parts of Afghanistan, Pakistan, Bangladesh. But you do see that Bangladesh is doing better and has significantly done better in female to male labor force participation rate. Nepal has significantly done well. Bhutan, Myanmar. It's only Pakistan and Afghanistan which are on the lower trends. Okay? So this is just an interesting statistic that I wanted to point out. Let's look at healthcare indicators, which are largely looking at female well-being as well. Issues like maternal mortality rate, adolescent birth rate, and these are gender-based indicators. If you can just go on the World Bank site, you'll find these indicators in the data available. Now, what do you find here is, if you just take 5 countries as cases, like Nepal, India, Bhutan, China, and Bangladesh. I wanted to add China because you need to see why China has done tremendously well in the last 2 decades or 3 decades. Is not because it's exporting more, it's not because it is growing at a fast rate, but because it's done a lot for social opportunities and investing in its own social capital, right? And you see that by looking at these indicators. In fact, if you just take this data in the pre-1970s scenario, India's performance and China's performance is at par, right? So something has been done there in order to improve the performance in the healthcare sector. So you do see India has a relationally high maternal mortality rate, right? And you can question sampling and data to the thread here, right? Sampling is how you collect data. We don't ask from house to house. It's virtually impossible to do that. But even if you say that the data is being more robust and transparent, which it is, you can rely on the data much more as compared to the data coming in from China. But you can also look at adolescent birth rate, which is not a problem in India. The third, which is share of seats in parliament, represents the role of women in political participation processes. There, even a country like Nepal has done significantly better. The last column, which is population with at least some secondary education. Now, the reason why I've put secondary education here, not primary, is because a lot has been done since the 90s in increasing women enrollment rates in schools at a primary level. So, in fact, there is a lot of evidence coming out through state actors and non-state actors that primary school enrollment rate for both boys and girls has gone up significantly. The problem is that most of them have not actually translated into secondary enrollment rate. So the issue now is not primary education per se, but is the number of, let's say, girls dropping out of schools after they've completed primary education, which is significantly high. In some of the rural areas, the average age by which girls get married is still significantly low, and that could explain partially. But that's changing. That norm is changing across states. Okay. So I guess on the gender point, you have some idea now how the segregation happens and the participation of female to male. We can have a longer discussion probably later if you have any questions. But I wanted to move quickly on the nourishment levels. Now this is important because nourishment levels and most statistics on nutrition, of course, there are two problems facing the world food system today. One is of malnourishment and the other is of overnutrition, which is, in other words, obesity or problems coming as a result of being. So here, with the size of the portions of your plates, it could be the latter affecting, but not the former. But the issue with nourishment is that areas that you've seen, and this is the statistic that gives you an idea of the prevalence of undernourishment as a percentage of population. Now, if I can read it correctly, I guess, yes, 35% of the Indian population seems to be suffering from malnourishment. This is a staggering statistic which can question anybody's faith in calling India as a rising power. Power is a different thing, but rising economy. Because you have 35% of your population, and this is the measured one. Unmeasured could be much higher. And one of the issues that seems to be connected with this, a lot of people, John Reyes is one economist who's worked a lot on this, Amar Sen has worked a lot. There are a lot of people who've looked at the statistics closely and they've seen that child nutrition between the age of 0 to 4, that means in months to the age of 4, seems to be directly relational to female literacy, right? As literacy levels have gone up, there is, because a lot of children are born with stunted growth, and that makes it extremely difficult to correct for. Now, that's a significant concern which is still not received enough, I would say, political attention, but as an important point to mention. So nourishment was something that I wanted to highlight. Let me point the last point, and this is connected to all the four that have been discussed before, right? Gaps in agricultural, manufacturing, and service sector scenarios, macro employment challenges across sectors, the gender divide, and high level of inequities in nourishment levels. And this is related to how much does the public sector invest socially in the level of opportunities to create for education and employment. Now, health expenditure in India, which is the percentage of GDP, and I mean, a lot of people question that, well, if you even increase your expenditure does not mean that you have enough health outcomes drawn. Well, I think that's a question worth asking after expenditure has come to a certain level. At this point of time, you would see that if the GDP of India is $100 trillion, it's spending less than $4 trillion in its healthcare segment, which is a drop in the bucket, right, in terms of the issues that has happened. A lot of the questioning that has happened amongst the policy circuits has said that, well, we don't want the government to put more money in healthcare because it's one-sided, right? There's no direct return. We want the private sector to fill in the gap. Issue with private sector investment in healthcare is that once you invest, private sector often has a certain interest in mind, which is related to not only profit maximization, but where it can have a maximum return on its investment. So that's why you will see that in a city like Delhi, you'll find the maximum number of private hospitals. So the problem of spatial distribution of healthcare facilities at a primary, secondary, and tertiary level becomes a challenge, because private investment would flow where maximum returns come in, right? So in the cities, private sector has played a huge role in improving healthcare facilities, not backed by insurance, right? So that's been an urban sector thing, but in the rural sector, the situation continues to worsen. So this is the amount of government expenditure as a percentage of thing. But where does the real analysis lie is not in how much government is spending, how much the average person is spending on healthcare. And this is something which is documented by an indicator called out-of-pocket healthcare expenditure. Out-of-pocket healthcare expenditure means I'm earning $500 a month, right? Say, I'm relatively happy in my job, but I am uninsured, not by the company that I'm working for. Maybe the company offers a very limited insurance, maybe accidental insurance, but in most cases I have to spend money, and even if I am insured, I have to pay for diagnostics, right? So I'm asked by a doctor to pay for a test, I'm paying the money out of my own pocket, and my out-of-pocket expenditure may significantly be higher, at least $200, $300. There was recently, there are multiple cases. You have to just look at Delhi private medical industry case. If you just type something like that, there are some recent cases that have come of overcharging in the billing segment. So private hospitals have had this issue, or private services have had. But even in case of public and private, the out-of-pocket expenditure has been very high. What does that mean? 62% by 2014 of the total expenditure which is out-of-pocket spent. I'm earning 100 rupees and 62% of that I'm spending on healthcare, right? And that's a significant number. Now, it's something which you'll see that in case of China has been worked upon very closely. China's healthcare investment did not only look up on increasing number of medical facilities within cities and rural areas, but it had to largely look at how it can reduce out-of-pocket expenditure. So they tackled this problem right in the 90s itself, from the 90s itself, by making heavy investments in reducing out-of-pocket expenditure. So most of the money, if you go in a place like Yunnan, or which are the lesser developed provinces, even there you would find that you don't have to pay that much for this. And they've integrated the Chinese ancient healing mechanisms, right, with the modern medicinal facilities to be able to guarantee that. What about education? Less than 3.7% of the total GDP spent on education. This is largely, and again, as lawyers, you have to look at this very closely. This is largely a constitutional issue. Constitutionally, the mandate to spend on education and healthcare is a subject which is a part of which list? Have you been introduced to three lists of subjects in the Indian Constitution? I should have had a slide on that. One is the union list, there's the other which is the state list, and there's the third which is the concurrent list. These are the three lists created for dealing with different subjects. Matters of national defense and security will be a part of union list, right? Matters of taxation like GST, for example, became a union list subject. That's why this tax and the implementation of the tax required a constitutional amendment, because tax for the first time of that magnitude became solely at the hands of the union government. The state list looks at matters of land acquisition, primarily, issues of education, right? And concurrent list has educations of healthcare and tertiary education. So while there is a segregation that has happened, it's often been a blame game between the union and the state. The union government has often made a point, we don't need to put that much money in education, the state has to do that. The state's idea is, well, we have a very limited revenue basket, the union government has to step in. So while there has been effort made in that direction, the level of overall expenditure on education has been significantly low. The states that have significantly done well include the state of Kerala, which is down south, has invested heavily in both education and healthcare at a time when the state government was incurring losses or was operating on a fiscal deficit. Even then it was continuing to invest, and that allowed it to get long-term returns in terms of its social capital level. In fact, both at the, so if you look at elementary, secondary and university education, this gives you an idea of how much the public revenue expenditure has been spent. So with the privatization happening in the higher education sector, Jindal is one of them, what happened is the incentive for the public sector, in other words, the government, to be able to provide more money on education got disincentivized. They said that we'll let the private sector fill in the gap. Very similar to healthcare. In both cases, you see that healthcare and education are only two nature of services where the role of the visible hand of the state is needed. Because pricing is not something, if you leave it to the private sector to completely deal with it, pricing will definitely happen on a demand-supply mechanism, where, for example, a student paying fee here will pay a significantly more amount of fee, and it's not computed on just a demand-supply metric, leaving others by the wayside, right? So your capacity to pay is something which becomes an important point. There's a very acclaimed economist whose work is something that you can familiarize yourself, who actually looked about this issue on not privatizing or not marketizing two segments, healthcare and education, primary level. His name is Kenneth Arrow. If you've not heard of him, Kenneth Arrow is an economist from the 1950s, and he brought out some of these insights way back in early 1970s when reforms in the US education segment or sector was happening. US education sector that time started moving towards private educational facilities and reduce public spending on education. So it was at that time he was trying to look at it. So public expenditure has been lowering. I did want to include just one slide on the state level scenario, because while we have discussed more or less macro segregates, if you look at the per thousand distribution of students by type of institution, the maximum representation of higher education institution in terms of student representation is in the state of Delhi. Now, Delhi's statehood is a very interesting case. It's a union territory by its own. It has a constitutionally special provision, right? So Delhi has its own budget, being the capital, very similar to Washington DC, right? I'm not sure if Canberra has the same logic, but maybe Canberra does not need it also. It doesn't have that many people. But in case of Washington DC and in case of Delhi, both you find they have a separate statehood and resources. Only other states which are doing significantly well, that means having more students in representing higher education locally, are the northeastern states, again very sparsely populated, right? But most states, barring Kerala, have very less representation in the higher education segment. All right. Okay, I want to take the next 5-10 minutes to discuss two major policy shocks, and I was hoping that we can take a short break before we move to, because you may need a cup of coffee, right? You've had a meal at some point of time, yeah, of course. So, and then I wanted to discuss the market case studies, right? That which will be a bit, I hope, more interesting. The two or the twin policy shocks that we're talking about, one is demonetization and the other is GST. Now, there are some references you must have received talking about how demonetization impacted the Indian scenario. But for making it extremely short, if you just look at the numbers, India's growth rate has tumulted or slumped down since the demonetization policy was announced in November 2016. So in November 2016, you have the Prime Minister announcing from tomorrow 500 and 1,000 rupee note can be burnt, and you can use them as for firewood. I mean, he made a statement that it would not hold any legal tender, so you can basically burn them. And for people who are at a time trying to, and farmers, for farmers, that was the peak season for shifting of agricultural cropping. So they had to make most of their payments in cash. It was a big jolt, right? ATMs went dried. In other words, ATMs did not have cash to dispense. And from my own observation, I think if this was announced in any other country, particularly in North America, right, having stayed some time in the US or in Canada as well, there would have not only been riots, you would have seen a civil conflict to the magnitude of I don't know how many deaths. And there was not even, I think there were 4 or 5 deaths that were recorded as a result of people fainting in the queue. But there were queues from 5 a.m. in the morning, or 4. You remember the Boxing Day sales that you get, right, once a year. So that time, that's a willful queuing up process. But here people would queue up for around 10 days, 15 days, from 4 a.m. in the morning till almost 10 p.m. at night, and would not get money or cash. Some states could not even get the cash. So this was disastrous. While GST has been a long thought kind of a tax reform that has been suggested by the previous government as well, I'll come to that. But I think what's important for us to look at is that in the act of policy making, right, whether in the field of economics or in political science or social frameworks, I think what is a very important framework for us to look at is whether a policy, whether it, by its very design and implementation, is consequentially sensitive to the outcomes it envisages, or is it independent of that. When I use the word consequentially independent, it means demonetization's main goal was to curb black money creation, or in other words, the shadow economy, which was thriving on cash. So Ajay mentioned the example of the domestic help worker. I could not pay most people employed depended on cash for 2 months or 3 months, right? So the effect of that is not captured anyway, right, by any statistic. While the idea that seems to be is to curb black money creation, as remonetization happened, as ATMs started getting the cash back, people switched back to using cash as an economy. Even right now, most of us would be using cash and not using debit cards or ATM cards, right, for using transactions. Now that's an interesting point. Neither digitization happened of transactions to that extent which was envisaged, or black money or shadow economy curbing down happened. So if 2 consequences were not achieved, the policy was seen to be consequentially independent of the outcomes. Outcomes not achieved, and at the same time, the process of implementation caused a huge disruption, a major disruption, right? While a tax reform like GST can be seen to be consequentially sensitive in nature, in the sense that it wants to reform the tax segment, which was marked by a huge number of segregated indirect taxes. There was a cess, there was a surcharge, there was an indirect tax, which is a sales tax, there's a custom tax, there's an octroi duty. So a businessman would have a nightmare doing trade across 3 or 4 states. If I'm doing trade within my own city, I'm fine. I just have to pay a set number of taxes. But across that was mission. That was the idea where GST was brought about. That we need a common tax, which can be a common indirect tax for different goods. The problem that happens is that as demonetization was rolling on, GST gets implemented without proper training for traders to file in their tax returns. So at a time when there was already disruption, GST's implementation caused a further disruption to the market, right? So there were a few points with respect to the GST system, and I think the couple of articles I've shared that should give you an idea of what is happening. But the first is, and this is a larger point in the Indian economy as a whole, there is a huge divide between what percentage of the overall taxes in India are indirect in nature and what are direct. Now, what is the difference between indirect and direct? Any idea? When I say indirect tax and I say direct tax, what does it mean? I mean, I can speak, but it should. And indirect tax means? Oh, no. Okay. So when you buy a Bisleri bottle, how much are you paying here? Let's say 10 rupees, right? That's the market price or the cost of production? Market price? So the market price is always inclusive of a certain percentage of tax that's imposed on it, right? And that tax, which is dependent on the sale of the product, is an indirect tax. The burden of the tax is passed on to the consumer of the product, right? In other words, the person who's buying has to pay that tax. If I'm not buying Bisleri, I don't have to pay tax, right? So the incidence of the tax, so the burden of the tax is shifted to the consumer. The producer pays for it in his or her capacity through a value-added method, and that's a different story. But indirect tax, the burden of the tax is not by one on the individual. If you buy more Bisleri, I'll pay more tax. Direct tax, on the other hand, is directly imposed on the individual through a certain percentage, which is what? The income tax that I pay on the income that I'm earning, right? It's directly the money that I'm paying. Of course, the pain of that is more direct as well. But that's something which you will see that as a democratic setup, it's been very difficult for regimes across the last 5 or 6 decades and since independence to include reforms in the direct tax segment. So India pays much low on its income tax capacity, right, as against its indirect. So there's a breakdown of 65 to 35 ratio, that 65% of the tax base in India is based on indirect, which is regressive, right? It's not as if that my income is $1,000 and I'm earning Bisleri, I'm paying the same amount of tax. A person whose income is $10 per day when is buying the Bisleri bottle is paying the same amount of tax, right? That's why indirect tax by its own very nature is considered regressive. And direct tax is considered progressive because it's on the income that you're earning. $1,000, I may be slapped to give more tax. $10, maybe I'm not taxed at all, right? That's one of the questions that has been brought on the GST discourse. The second is multiple tax rates. Now, most of you would have taken a plane from Australia. Yeah, I'm quite sure. So, were you flying economy or business? Economy. I won't ask. No, not everybody has to respond. Economy is okay, right? Now, in India, in the airline segment, and I think that's apart from telecom, that's another revolution that's happened. Nowhere you would find cheap flights to this level, right? If you're flying, some airlines don't have a premium or a business segment because they want to also cater to a higher middle income class. So they would say, we'll offer you a premium economy seat. So there's economy, there's premium economy, and there's business. The problem is when you have multiple tax rates, where do you categorize different products in what rate? There was 0% GST, there was 5% GST, there was 12% GST, and there was 18%. These were 4 slabs that were created. So economy, let's say, was put in 5, business was put in 28, but where do you put premium economy? So companies went complete baffled. They said, how do you put the tax? And if tomorrow we don't pay the tax in the next quarter, you're going to put us behind bars. So a lot of tax, of course, tax lawyers got a new light of the day. And the second was a lot of legal disputes started proliferating, and this started happening in the last 6 months. So the use of multiple taxes, indirects, and categorization has been a big challenge, right? The cost-benefit analysis would say that over the short term, while it has been a disruption because of a demonetization hangover of sorts, over the long run, you may see that a tax like GST is going to improve business sentiment. And this is likely in the next 3 to 4 years. But in the current scenario, you'd see that India's economy is in some kind of trouble as a result of this. Now, while we make all of this claim that there is some significant problem to how the Indian economy is functioning, you see that the stock market keeps on rising. And you have to just look at the equity market in India. You know what equity market is? When I say equity, okay. How does a company raise capital if it runs out of people it can borrow from? So they make the company what? Open or public, they go public and sell down shares. That's where it any form of investment in buying shares would be called as equity investment. Somehow the equity market in India has been melting up. In financial literature, there is an idea of meltdown. 2007 crisis was a meltdown in banking, right? Everything came crashing. In the Indian scenario, we see that the market is going up. And this is all perception. Or in other words, the idea that in the next 2 years, things are going to be better off. So most people are banking for things to improve, and we've discussed very clearly what are the structural problems, right? These structural problems have not been addressed with the current policy that are in place, and it is highly unlikely that what you're seeing in the stock market is going to be backed in by the actual valuation of stocks. Private investment is likely to stay low, right? Foreign direct investment may go up, but is not a permanent solution to a very endemic problem. And you are likely to see a stagnation of the wage structure at a time when inflation and food prices may go up and may cause a further disruption in the ability of people to sustain their livelihood. Okay, with that cautiously pessimistic note, let's take a break for 5 minutes. Okay, 10 hours of a day of the week, and it disappears from here or there, right? So for example, when you'll take a cab from here to Delhi, right, on a Sunday, you will find entering into the city near the Tibetan refugee colony. If you don't know where it is or what it is, just write Tibetan refugee colony and please make a visit there before you go. It's very close, not too far from the city, right? It's in the northern part. Right opposite to the Tibetan refugee colony is a market that is set up only on Sunday. It's one of the largest street markets, and it is set up on a Sunday for a period of 7 to 8 hours, where people from all over the city, and I don't know how many cities close by, tend to come down and buy products cheaply. It sells things like apparel. I mean, from a TV remote, you can find everything, right? And I really wanted to understand how these markets function. What's the reason why people are selling in it? Who is buying? And how does the process of trade happens, or commerce or exchange happens? So methodologically, we devised a 5P framework, right? And this is perhaps the only slide that gives you an idea of what is that we wanted to look at. The 5P framework tries to address a given price of a product, right? So what role does bargaining play? I think we had someone, you're mentioning about how bargaining helped you determine a price. And in fact, even if I ask you right now what's the actual cost of the clock, you would not be able to probably tell me, right? It's just something that 1,000 made you feel that, okay, you were being ripped off, or probably it was a lot, but 400 is okay. I can pay for this, right? Maybe if I go and buy the same clock and I get it for 100 rupees, right? Maybe that's the thing, right? So how or what to what extent bargaining plays a role? Now, there's a lot of work done on bargaining models in the field of economics, but these are models that are universally adoptable or implementable. It's not the case here, right? Bargaining plays a very different role in every market, in every product that is sold. And how does that play? Well, the second was product. So what kind of product baskets, or in other words, what kind of products are sold in these markets, right? So we want to look at street markets, or markets which are in a way set up on given days. Also markets that are traditional markets or old markets in the city of Delhi, which you find in Old Delhi, right? So for that, we identified around 3 or 4 market spaces. I think I'll discuss only one with you guys in the shortage of time. The third was the position. Now, position plays a very key role in, if a market is located in, as I mentioned in the morning, the Delhi Heart Market, right, which is near INA metro station. It's in the southern part of Delhi. The southern part of Delhi is one which has residentially the highest class of people staying. When I use the word highest class, I'm not judging or putting judgmental values here. I'm just saying people who have traditionally more money, right, to spend. So you see that the structure of the market, the structure of the way in which the dynamics of the market takes place or transactions take place is all catered, or in other words tested for the spatiality of the position where it is located. The same market, if it was set up right here near I would say Sonipat for that matter, would have a very different way in which pricing would work or what kind of products would be sold. The fourth was protection, and because these markets are the ones which operate on a very fine line between what is formal and informal, one wanted to understand to what extent the local government or the officials of the government, which in other means is the municipality involved, provides some kind of logistical support or protection to the vendors or the merchants who are selling products in these market spaces. The final point was to understand profitability. I mean, of course, you can't be doing business in the market for 25, 30 years as vendors or merchants were doing without having significant profitability. Because a lot of them are not paying any tax, they get almost a direct return on what they are selling, right? So these are the 5 P's that we wanted to study. Let's start with Delhi Heart. I'll try walking through most of what we did. This is where it's located. I mean, this is just the Google Earth map image. But if you see that most of the houses that are constructed, I mean, this is the posh South Delhi colony space where Delhi Heart is located. It's in fact one of the most popular, I don't know if you went on TripAdvisor on some website, one of the most commonly visited places by tourists coming from abroad is for purchasing goods, right? If you need a apparel or a shawl or the crafts, artsy stuff, a lot of people usually go to Delhi Heart to buy it, right? This is how the market looks like. I mean, of course, there are a couple of snapshots, but we interviewed merchants in different spaces. It's nicely laid out. It's crowded, but it's not too many people at the same time. Each shop has a registration license number, but none of the transactions that take place in each of these stalls have an invoice or a credit slip. In other words, it's not accounted for. Totally on bargaining. Not to say if you come in from Australia, you're likely to pay more than someone who's coming in from Sri Lanka, for example, because a person may have a more familiarity with the system of how these markets work. This is not only a Delhi feature. This is more of a South or Southeast Asian feature in how markets involved, right? So that's, let's say on the right, that's Shabir. I'll just talk about his story in a bit. But the most of what Delhi Heart sells are paintings, that is paintings that are worked upon in states of Bihar. So how each stall is given is there's a lottery system based on which each vendor gets an opportunity to sell all his or her stock in 15 days. As soon as 15 days expire, he or she has to vacate the stall and new vendors come in. That's how Delhi Heart works throughout the year, right? So if you meet someone now, there's very little chance that you're going to meet the same person the next time you come in, right? You would be selling it in different. These will be local traders coming from different states of the country. So you'll find paintings, garments, jewelry laden with silverware, mats and carpets, a lot of mats and carpets. In fact, you'd find a lot of shawls as well because it's winter time. So the shawls coming in from the parts of the north, that's Kashmir and Srinagar, will find a lot. You also have a lot of food stalls. So we started just profiling the market at the first level. The idea was to do this. In fact, try getting an idea of the inventory that is being sold, that is the product being sold, and how is it being procured. So from the time of getting the raw materials and putting that all together, stocking, producing and selling, how are these merchants operating that, right? That was one of the main questions we wanted to ask most people. So you would find that in Delhi Heart, usually people procured their products from the state that they came from and sourced it from other parts. The manufacturing took place in the state itself. The distribution, they were responsible. So most of them were getting all their stocks traveling by train, putting their stock right up, coming to the market, no support whatsoever by any local authority, or in other words, by the warehousing facilities available, right? Whatever was sold by the end of the 12th day. The 13th and the 14th and the 15th day, you would get probably the same product at a 60 or a 70% discount, because they have to sell what they have got before they go back. The cost of carrying forward an unsold stock was something that it was very difficult for them to bear, right? Let me start with Shabir's narrative. I'll just probably read quickly. So Shabir, and he's from Kashmir, right? It's on one of the tense, conflicted spaces, right? So Shabir is a vendor in Delhi Hart. He's 32 years old. He's a shawl vendor, also sells a variety of other woolen items in Delhi Hart, and has been in this business for the last 15 years. His family, his business is a family-owned business, a managed one, and was started by his grandfather. He sets shop in Delhi Hart only for a period of 15 days at a stretch. Apart from Delhi Hart, he sets shop in other parts of the countries, participating in trade fairs. So all he does is he moves from one market to the other, seeing where the next trade fair is happening. The most consistent one where he has been in is in Delhi Hart itself. Shabir sources his raw materials from Kashmir, the state where he comes from, and has employed karigars. Karigars is a word we use for craftsmen, right? I'm using the Hindi term. To embroider the cloth. The embroidery is done by these craftsmen at a low cost, and as he stated, his business was mostly based on self-manufacturing or self-owned systems, and there was room for negotiation with the craftsmen. So he would pay marginally some sum of money to the craftsmen. The selling price in Delhi Hart used to have all his expenses covered, which included the transportation cost, that is rupees 50 per kg by a courier. So he would send all his shawls or carpets through a courier facility, right, right from his state to Delhi, and that would cost him 50 rupees, or almost like 1.2 or 1.25 Australian dollar per kg, and one would imagine around 100 or 150 kgs being sent from Srinagar to Delhi. The rental cost in Delhi Hart, which costs around 10,000 rupees, which is let's say 200 Australian dollars or so, and the cost of staying in Delhi for the period of 15-20 days. So they don't have any residential facility. They are most of them, in fact, a lot of them are staying in nearby urban slums. And for the time that they're staying, they're trying to factor all of this cost in the price of the product that they're selling, right? So it's very difficult to understand what's the margin at which they're trying to maximize their profit. That's Shabir's narrative. He sells shawls. The second market is a market which is based in the east part of Delhi and is set up on a Wednesday. Every Wednesday, this market is operational from 4 p.m. till 10 p.m. In fact, this is on the street road itself. At that point of time, there are massive traffic jams. It's suicidal to drive from those ways, but there's no regulation of traffic or nothing. So it's just the market is set up, people come and buy. It's called the term bazaar that you see in the title is a notion. It's an Urdu word for market. In the Mughal times, bazaars were the most common. And that's something which you'll see in Old Delhi as well. Logistically, to speak of, East Delhi is also the area where most of the migrant people from different cities come and settle in. That's why one of the reasons we picked up East Delhi. Infrastructurally or logistically, all they have on the right you see is a wooden plank. They have this wooden plank on their own. They rent it out. They pay 100 rupees per day for using that wooden plank to put all their goods in there. And you see on the left there is what? What can you see? What is that? It's circled big in red. What is that? It's an LED light. It costs around $200. That's how they manage their light, because there's no power that they get to be able to sell the product really late in the night. So that's light, that's warehousing. That's how they fix that. This is perhaps the most diverse market. You can get from pasta, spaghetti to I don't know what, even children's toys and plastic utensils. Anything you can get, in fact, right? You just have to go and spend some time there. This is what it would look like, right? None of the spaces are registered. That's how the space operates, right? In fact, this is the only space where you would see even, what is barter? So you would say barter is a system that was in ancient times. But let's say you buy a piece of cloth and you pay 1,000 rupees for that. Barter would mean, barter means you give product A for product B in return, and there's only the exchange of products happening. That's how needs and wants met. It's only for the money to be innovated upon, where money came as an instrument and change. So you would buy a pair of jeans, you would pay 1,000 rupees. The person most of the times would not have the change to give back, right? So for 100 rupees or 200 rupees that would be left, and you bought the jeans, let's say for 800 rupees, there are 200 rupees in the change. He would say, I'll give you free cup, I'll give you cups for 200 rupees. He said, I don't need cups. He said, that's fine, I don't have change, so I'll give you cups. He said, what a kind of cups? So you'll have tea cups given in the range of 50 rupees. So in fact, you'll have exchange of goods taking place, right, in exchange for the transaction that's happening. And that's something which is very common, that you find not only here but elsewhere as well. Again, the wholesale procurement storage process is extremely interesting. I can give you one example of a guy who sells bakery products. Now, bakery, as you would imagine, it's quite perishable. You need to get it fresh and you need to sell it off at a very fast pace, right? This guy would come from a state which is located 12 hours by train, and it would take a 1 hour flight. He can't afford the flight. He would get the product, the fresh bakery product, traveling in by train overnight, morning get it here by Wednesday morning set up the market, sell the entire bakery, and take the evening train from here. He's all residing in that state itself. It's a city in Bhopal. So he would come all the way from that city to Delhi, sell all his product at a margin of, I don't know what, 50% or something, has no whole warehousing facility. On a day where he has to stay over, he has to usually rent it out in Islam, right? A final narrative that I could bring out was with Ashok's narrative. So Ashok is this guy who's working, and we clubbed these people who were floating from one city to the other and market to the other as floating vendors. Right? They're floating. They don't have a space of their own where they're doing their business on a day-to-day basis. Ashok has been working as a floating street vendor from the past 25 to 30 years. He sets up a shop of cotton wear for children in various markets around Delhi on 4 days a week. So he moves across different parts of the city on 4 days. However, with the change in season, he will shift to other businesses. He has been a helper at shops when he was young. He used to sell tea, often sells vegetables, and also durable goods in the Wednesday market. He laments that the market has slowed down considerably after demonetization happened. Now, when demonetization happened, these markets disappeared from Delhi for an entire month. I mean, so you can imagine the amount of livelihood lost of people, because if there was no cash, they would not be able to be paid, right? Overall, he pays around 20 rupees as rent for the LED lights that you saw, 40 rupees as rent for the wooden plank that you just saw, and 10 rupees as rent to the local municipality for not creating much of trouble, and is able to sell all his goods using an automobile that he takes from a state in, I think you know Gujarat. If you know Gujarat, one of the cities in Gujarat is Gandhinagar. So he comes from Gandhinagar, and that's from where he sells the product. So this guy is coming right from there, spends an amount of time in Delhi selling his. Last, or not the least, was Old Delhi. Now this is where most of the markets have traditionally been set up. History of these markets are almost 300 years old or 400 years old. You can see it from the infrastructure, in fact. That's where the Mughal Empire was habited. So in fact, most of the architecture there you see is Mughal construction, right? That's where the Red Fort and most of the places is. If you just look at the points, you see that most of these markets are clustered right amongst each other, right? As you compare to, let's say you saw one of this Wednesday market, then you saw this Delhi Heart, so this was nicely spaced out, right? Then if you look at now the map, this is quite clustered. This is where the migrant settlements are. And if you just look at this area, this is all markets, right? This is one of the most crowded parts of the city. Now, the markets, so in Meena Bazaar, for example, you'll get the most lovely saris. That's the Indian wear that you find. Chavri Bazaar, you'll find the best brass jewelry, right? Brass laden jewelry or gold laden jewelry. All of this is imitation. None of that's original, but has a huge market, right? And last is Chandni Chowk market. You get amazing food and whatever. But all these markets are spatially located very close. Now, this is a picture taken at the least rush time. This is basically at a time when I could probably take out the camera and take a picture, right? Otherwise, it's virtually very, very difficult to be able to get any space to be able to work, right? Now, one thing that we really wanted to interview was someone, there's a motor market. What is this old motor market is? It takes unused scrap motor vehicle part, which is basically dumped in the yard, polishes that and actually resales it out. Now, a lot would say that is that something which is legal? Well, the legality of it is not clear because this is largely a part of an unorganized segment. But the way they get the scrap material is get at a cost of, let's say, 100 rupees, right? Polish the entire machine part. It could be of an automobile or it could be of anything, and sell it off at almost 10% or 20% the margin. That the spread of that is huge. And that's the last, I guess, point we were looking at. Now, I think most of these spaces are at some point of time going to be covered during that journey. I think that's one of the reasons why Sean mentioned that because you'd be spending some time in the city, it would be interesting if you try looking at some of these 5 Ps, right, that we took in. I mean, the study is long and I mean, we can go on for hours discussing it. But all I wanted to give you an idea is what is that we wanted to cover, understand the role of bargaining, what kind of products are sold, what kind of a role of position plays in the class of the products that is being sold, who's buying it, right? And the protection that they receive from the local municipality and the profitability part. So if you just go and in your visits and you take a walking tour across most of these, just observe very closely on what is being sold and see if this observation that you've learned here or got an idea of, is it validated in your own observations or not? If some of you or any one of you is interested in reading or getting an idea of the report was published on the center's website. We presented it in a couple of spaces, but this is just for an idea for your reading. All right, thank you guys. Thanks a lot. And I hope we get a chance to interact sometime soon as well. Thank you.